Okay, so welcome. I'm Salvatore, and today I'm going to discuss SimFS, a simulation data virtualizing file system interface. So the basic observation behind SimFS is that scientific simulations have always been and are becoming increasingly important in scientific research. And examples are supernova explosions or human brain simulation or climate science that basically uses simulations as everyday tool, right? So a specific instance is the CLClean project that was a collaboration between ETH, CSCS, and MeteoSwiss, where basically the aim here was to run a 10-year-long simulation over the whole Europe at high resolution. And here you can see the difference in the quality of the data you get from the simulations when switching from 50 kilometers, so low resolution, to high resolution 2 kilometers, right? So now the problem of this kind of simulation is that this is going to produce multiple petabytes of data. And the question is, how do we store all this data in a cost-effective way? Right. So CLClean is not the only instance, and for example, already in 2015, the largest archive for climate data was up to 500 petabytes, and a single cosmological simulation, so a single one, it can produce already 2.5 petabytes of data. Right. So if we put this on a timeline, then we can see that in the 90s, we had simulations producing data in the order of megabytes, then petabytes a few years ago. So it's perfectly reasonable to expect that we will hit the exabyte wall in the near future, right? So again, the question is now, how do we store all this data in a cost-effective way? So before we move on, let's quickly review what are the approaches that we can use today for storing simulation data and make it available to the analysis, right? So usually we have the scientist that sets up the simulation runs, and then produces the simulation data, right? So this data now can be quite some data. So at this point, the nice thing of this approach is that you have the analysis tools that are directly interfaced to the through the file system interface to the disk storage and can access this data in whatever way they want. They can go forward in time, backward in time over the simulated data. They can access this randomly, so they are completely free, right? But this is the problem, because now you have to imagine that this usually are some kind of hero runs. For example, you take the whole pit stain for 1 week, you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get this simulation done, right? So it cannot be that the next day you just say, okay, I cannot store this data, it costs too much, I will delete it. Okay, so you need to store this for some period of time that we call data availability period. We will speak about this later. And during this amount of time, the simulation data has to be like available for analysis, right? So the completely orthogonal approach is in situ analysis, where we still have the scientist that runs the simulation, and at this point we don't store any data. So the analysis are directly coupled with the simulation. So usually there are many variants of in situ. In some of those, the analysis can run directly inside the simulator. So you can inject simulation code inside the analysis, and basically you analyze on the fly, right? So now the issue with this is that if the moment after you finish the simulation, you want to like make a different analysis, or you want to reanalyze something, then you need to resimulate, right? So now this is the problematic factor that the simulation, that is the simulation cost. So what we want to propose is something in the middle. So in fact, if we put these two approaches on a spectrum, we have on disk on one side, where we basically store everything and we never resimulate. In situ on the other side, where we store nothing and always resimulate if you want to reanalyze something. And what we want to enable is something in the middle that is basically store something and resimulate if it's needed, right? So and this can shift between towards the two approaches according to the needs and the resources that you make available and that you have. So to have an overview of how SimFS works, we still have the scientists, we still need them, right, to set up the simulation, then the simulation runs. But this time we are not interested in the data itself. We are more interested in checkpoints. Now, checkpoints are just files that you can use to restart the simulation from some point in time. So I mean, the easiest way to get a checkpoint will be just to dump your whole memory of the simulation process and then load it again. But there are much more sophisticated approaches that allow you to just reparameterize the model and then resume. So usually these checkpoints are used for like reliability. So if something breaks, if the power goes off, then you can restart. We are using them here for enabling simulation virtualization. And the idea now is that once you have these checkpoints, so this is all you need to have virtualization. So you have the analysis tools that are interfaced to SimFS, and this interface will be, again, the classical analysis tool interface. So if they're using NetCDF, they can keep using NetCDF, even POSIX would work. And then SimFS decides what to do. So in this case, there is no data available, so we need to restart the simulation. So you asked for a file X. File X is not in our cache that we will introduce in a second. We restart the simulation by choosing the closest checkpoint file. So the checkpoints file are these yellow blocks here. So you asked for this file here. We just choose the closest one and get you the data you asked. So if the simulation can go backward in time, we can also start from this one, for example. So the idea now is that we resimulate, we create the data, and then we cache the data in a way such that if you ask then for the same data again, or analysis tool or another analysis tool asks for the same data again, then we can just provide that data from the cache. So to see it a little bit in more details, so what we use are standard interfaces, as we said before. So NetCDF, HDF5, and POSIX, and and then we have on this other side the computing facility where we can basically resimulate, right? So you can imagine this like CSCS where you can submit your simulations, and you have the storage always on the computing facility, and you can access this storage through these classical interfaces. But additionally to that, we have a client-side library that is called dvlib, that basically what it does is just intercepts the call you are doing. For example, open X in NetCDF, then this gets intercepted by dvlib, and dvlib then communicates with a service that is running again on the computing facility. Let's call it the data virtualizer. And the data virtualizer now knows which files you have, has some caching policies, so implements some caching policies in order to choose how to edit file. We tested many, they are in the paper, as an index of the checkpoints or the restart files that can be used to restart the simulation, and as machinery basically to launch new jobs if the data is missing. So this is like a big cache. If there is a cache miss, then we resimulate, right? So, and here on the computing facility, we can actually launch simulations. So, and the nice thing now is that even on the simulation side, this is completely transparent, because again, what we assume is that the simulator will produce files using these interfaces here. And again, then we can intercept like the create call. So the simulator is producing now file X. It will have a create call of X. We intercept it and we communicate to the data virtualizer, okay, look, file X is being created. So if you have now some clients that are waiting for this file because they are hanging on a miss, then you can just notify them through the control channel and say, now you can resume, right? So the we also have some prefetching and monitoring machinery that I will explain later. So the idea now is, this is nice because it uses the classical interfaces. So this works basically with legacy analysis tools. You don't have to modify your analysis tool to work with that. You can just set up some environment variables, LD preload this, assuming that these libraries are dynamically linked, and everything will work. However, there could be cases in which you want more information, like you're writing a new analysis tool, then maybe you want also some other information. For example, there is a miss. The simulation job on the computing facility fails, right? So in the legacy case, you will just get the error code that is consistent with the interface you are using, that's I can't open this file. But maybe you also want to know like why it failed and some other status information. This is why we introduced the SimFS APIs. So the idea of this SimFS API is not to replace the classical ones, so netcdf and others, because those are optimized to that for access when files are ready. So instead, it runs on the side to give more information about the virtualization. So just an example here, you can acquire a file saying that, okay, now I'm going to access this file, and this call will return only when actually this file is available, meaning that either it is in cache or it has been resimulated. Then you can open this and you are guaranteed that this will succeed. You close and then finally release the data saying that, now I don't need this, you can also evict if needed. So just to, like, I'm not going into the details, but just to give you a quick overview. So you can initialize and finalize some simulation context. We will see what is a simulation context later. You can acquire data saying that I'm interested in a number of file names of files, and then you have also a non-blocking version of this code, so you can just like kind of prefetch the data you are going to access later, and then you can wait for like some acquire requests or on some subset of files of this acquire request. So you can see that this is kind of an MPI-like interface. Finally, we have also a call for checking bit reproducibility. So let me take this as an opportunity to make a small parenthesis. So the idea is that we are enabling scientists to access the simulation data over multiple years. So we are making there is an underlying assumption that is after 1 year, for example, you can rerun the simulation because there was a miss. And at this point, you will get the same data. So we assume that the simulation is bit reproducible. So now there is a lot of work going in this direction, and actually for scientific reproducibility, all simulators should be bit reproducible. But if they are not, then we just delegate the decision of what to do in that case to the client, to the analysis tool, sorry. Because you can imagine that there may be cases in which you can just cope with that. The files are slightly different because the compiler changed or the architecture changed, so you got different floating point units, whatever, and it's fine. And other cases where you need to stop and say, okay, I mean, I really needed the exact file. Other than that, we also have command line interface. So basically this, you can say SimFS weak, where weak identifies basically the simulation you are targeting and lists all the files that are supposed to be generated by this kind of simulation. And you can see here the files, if they exist or not, so if they are in the cache or not, what is the original checksum of the file, so, and what is so this is the checksum that we have seen the first time, and what is the checksum we have seen the last time. So you can check if bit reproducibility is holding or not. Okay, so now one question is, what happens, I mean, okay, now I'm opening a file basically, and then you are triggering a resimulation. So will this slow down my analysis? Well, the quick answer is yes, it will. But we can use some strategies in order to mitigate this slowdown. And also, I mean, there is one thing to consider, that SimFS is meant not for interactive analysis, but more for batch analysis, right? So you submit your analysis, it goes overnight, and it gets you the data. So what happens if we just don't do anything? So we don't use any strategy to accelerate the simulation or the analysis in this case. So for example, this is the time on the horizontal axis. Now this is the file you are asking. Let's say that this is simulation file number 1. So this file, we assume there is no data in cache. So what we have to do is to restart the simulation. So we will pay some simulation latency, right? So this simulation latency now is for example, reading the checkpoint file, or for getting the job started, so getting it through the job queue. Right, so there could be some time here. And then there is the problem, okay, you just asked for file number 1. So now, for how long do I have to resimulate? So the idea now is that we can have some sort of cache line, and we simulate for a fixed number of steps, right? And then after this number of steps, so we simulate these files here, and the client on the bottom keeps accessing the files. Now you ask for file number 5, then we need to restart again, right? So every time we pay this simulation latency that can be also quite high. So the first thing we can do is try to mask this restart latency. And basically the idea is we observe your access pattern. And if we see that, okay, you are going forward in time, and I know that on average, I need this much time to restart my simulation, then at some point I can just prefetch this simulation and hoping that I will be able to actually mask you hide this restart latency, and then nothing happened, and you see the client sees this as a long simulation. And by the way, I mean this is mostly for the legacy analysis tools, right, where you don't have any other interface than the classical open, close, read interface. But if you use the SimFS interface, this job becomes much easier. So the last like strategy that we can do is matching analysis bandwidth. So here we have seen that, okay, now we mask the analysis, the restart latency, but then we will get the data with some throughput, that is the throughput with which the simulator produces the data. What if my analysis is faster than that, right? So, I mean, I have to make a note here and say that we have seen cases that where the analysis is actually not faster than the simulator, so maybe this is not even needed. But if this is the case, then we can just compute like how slower we are with respect to analysis, and then try to match that that speed by starting multiple simulations in parallel. So every simulation will always simulate a different time span, right? But after some point, we should be able to match the analysis speed and then also like remove this additional overhead. So of course, now we need a way to limit this number of simulations here, because now you can imagine that if I have a very slow simulator and I have just a super fast analysis tool, I can blow up the job queue by triggering a lot of parallel simulations, right? So this is something you can limit. So like the maximum number of simulations SimFS can keep in flight. And if we have, if we can like make a recap of this toy example, we see that basically if we don't do anything in this amount of time from here to here, we simulated 12 output steps or analyzed 12 output steps. If we mask the restart latency, this becomes 16, and then if we also match the analysis bandwidth, this becomes 25. We actually implemented and tested this on PitStain with an analysis tool that was just accessing one file after the other, one simulation file after the other. Again, there was no data in cache, and you can see here the running time of the simulation of the analysis tool as we vary the maximum number of resimulations that we can have in flight. So basically this height here, right? So you can see that by increasing this, we start scaling, and actually we use the machine better and improve the analysis time. Okay, so initially I was discussing how I was speaking about cost effectiveness, right? So now the question is SimFS cost effective? So to understand this and to study this, we introduced this concept of data availability period. So this says you run a simulation and you want to make this data available for X years, for example. And then we develop cost models for all the approaches we discussed. So on disk, SimFS, and in situ. I'm not going into the details, but those are discussed in the paper. We assume a simulation that is producing an output step every 20 seconds, and basically this benchmark just throws a number of or spawns a number of analyses that will access random period of simulated time, basically. And so in total, we have 100 analyses. So this is to simulate that over like the data availability period that you have, you will have 100 analysis tools that will access different regions of the simulated space, basically. Okay, so we calibrate the cost model over Microsoft Azure, and we configure SimFS to use the 25% of the whole simulation of the whole disk space that would have been needed if we wanted to store all the results of this 1 month long simulation. And we use restart intervals of 8 hours. So over a 1 month simulation, every 8 hours, we produce a checkpoint file. So the result now is that if we plot the cost of keeping this data available for a given amount of time that is on the x-axis here, we can see that SimFS start becoming more cost-effective after some time. So in situ is as always the same cost because you store nothing. You always resimulate, right? So you have this 100 analysis over whatever time it's on the x-axis, and the cost will be always the same, assuming that the compute cost remains constant over time. And then if you want to keep your data just for 6 months, then you don't need to use anything. You just need to store everything because it's the cheapest solution. But then if you want to store this for more time, then SimFS becomes the best solution over these three. And like after, if you want a data availability period of 5 years, then you have a 2x difference with respect to in situ. Okay, so now what happens if you start, so this plot here is for a specific instance, so Azure, but what happens if we start playing with the compute and storage cost? This is why we have this heat map here, where we have compute cost on the y-axis, storage cost on the x-axis, and we show basically how cheaper is in SimFS with respect to the other solution. So the green area is where we are more cost effective, basically, and we are up to a factor of 2.65x more cost effective than the minimum solution over on disk and in situ. So you can see that basically if storage cost is free, right, and the compute cost is high, it's better to just store everything. While if the storage cost is high and compute cost is free, then you can just always resimulate. But in the middle, SimFS always provides a more cost-effective solution. Okay, so the last question I want to answer is, what if I need only some of the data produced by the simulation? So let me elaborate a bit more on this. So the scenario we put ourselves in until now is the following. So we have a set of analysis tools here, and they are interfaced to SimFS. And on the other side, there is the simulation that can be rerun if needed, right? Now, this simulation has to be configured with some configuration files that will tell the simulator which files, what is the output that this simulation will produce, right? For example, these fields every 3 minutes, these other fields every 50 minutes, and so on. So, but what if I have different analysis tools, or I can classify my analysis tools in a way such that they are interested in only a subset of all this output here. So for example, I mean, if I am in this class of analysis tool and I have a miss, and then I need to resimulate, I don't care about all the other output that is being produced. I just care about this field here. So why should I get all this other data? So the idea is to just invert this and have introduce simulation contexts. So the idea is that each class of analysis tool is interfaced not directly to SimFS, but comes to SimFS with a simulation context that says, okay, I am in this class of analysis tools, and if there is a miss, then start the simulation with these parameters in a way such that it produces just the output that I need. And this will translate in lower resimulation costs, basically, and also better performance. Okay, so the context that your analysis needs to use can be specified either through the SimFS APIs, or you can just use environment variables if you're using the legacy interface. Okay, so you can use also this simulation contexts to enable some sort of cache hierarchy. Basically, the idea is that whenever you have a client that is trying to open some file X, then what we said until now was, if there is a miss, then resimulate. But actually, nothing forbids us to just say, if there is a miss, then try to get the data from some other storage that is maybe cheaper, maybe tapes, even tapes would work, right? So it's enough that this simulation context tells us how to get this data. So it has a job script with a clear interface that you need to provide you as the person that configures the SimFS system, that tells us how to get next data. And then finally, we can have the last level cache that actually restarts the simulation. Okay, so to conclude, we discussed the importance of simulations in scientific research, and also like the problem of storing exabytes of data, and this will probably be reached, or we will probably have to deal with this in the near future. So, and propose SimFS as available alternative for approaching exa-scale simulations, and then having something in the middle between the two extreme approaches that are on disk and in situ. So we also discussed how SimFS works and what are the strategies that we can use to improve the analysis time and its cost effectiveness. So the takeaway message is that what SimFS aims to do, or the direction in which it goes, is to have simulations as a service. So you are a big institution, a multidisciplinary institution, and you just expose, for example, some simulation contexts, right? That those are the services that you have, and then the scientists the scientists alone that can't afford to run the hero run for getting the super cool data can just interface to this institution and get the data through SimFS. In fact, if you remember from the slide at the beginning, the only thing you need on the client side to interface to SimFS is just a TCP connection and link our client side library. So this concludes my presentation. The SimFS code is actually available on GitHub, and this was a project done by SPCL, C2SM, MetaSwiss, and CSCS. And I'm happy to take questions.